Among a field of seriously strong competition, I've come up with my list of the top 5 Kevlar pickleball paddles. I've certainly had my work cut out for me, as some of the highest quality pickleball paddles in the game are ones that have incorporated Kevlar into their paddle faces. I also put together a deep dive, measurement-based analysis of the benefits of Kevlar, including things that are actually not benefits of Kevlar, so feel free to reference that video if you want to learn more about the science there. The paddles on this list are some of the absolute best paddles in the game, and each of them had to beat out several other really good paddles to make this top 5 list. So let's get right into it. The first on this list is our number 5 paddle, the Bread and Butter Fat Boy. The Fat Boy is kind of a sneaky Kevlar paddle. And what I mean by that is the super unique design and ultra plush feel of the Fat Boy almost makes you forget that this paddle was even made of Kevlar in the first place. But if you look close, you can actually see the alternating Kevlar carbon fiber weave in the paddle face. This 16mm standard shaped paddle is ultra stable and plush feeling with a swing weight of 109 and a twist weight in the Elite 7+ range. With this channel's discount code, the Fat Boy comes to a final price of $160. And the only problem I see with that price is that it's going to keep the Fat Boy selling out quickly until Bread and Butter can get some stock built up. This would be a good paddle for people who like a more plush feel, want a more control-oriented paddle, and of course, you're into the super killer design. But it may not be a good paddle for people who like a stiffer feel or want higher levels of pop. Coming in next at number 4 is the Mage Pro Gen2. The strong performance of this paddle was really surprising for me, and coupling that with its price, I really just couldn't see a way of keeping it off this list. After the 30% off discount code this channel was given, the Mage Pro Gen2 comes in at $119, which makes it tied for the second lowest Kevlar paddle that I've ever tested. This also comes with Hudef's lifetime warranty and a 30-day test drive return policy. This hybrid shaped paddle also has a Kevlar carbon fiber blend face material, and compared to the Mage Pro Gen 1, it packs a much stronger pop. It also has the convenience of both a 14mm and 16mm option, and every time I've run side-by-side pop tests, both of these thicknesses consistently land toward the top end, though not out of a controllable range. It's honestly hard to find much to complain about these paddles, all things considered. But I would say these would be good paddles for people who want a reliable and maneuverable paddle with stronger pop than paddles like the Fat Boy, Spartus Apollo, or Mach 2 Forza, and plays a little closer to the balanced all-court category. But these may not be good paddle choices for people who need paddles that are either more control or power-oriented purists. Coming in at the number 3 spot is the Ethos Dunamis. This is the point where this list becomes particularly good for me, and conversely becomes really hard to sort. The Dunamis is an incredibly unique 14mm standard shaped Kevlar carbon fiber blended paddle that I personally feel caters more towards the aggressive, attack-oriented playstyle. And after the discount code that this channel was given, it comes to a final price of $153. In side-by-side pop testing, this paddle was consistently in the top positions when compared to other similarly shaped paddles, with the only Kevlar paddle in the standard shape with higher levels of pop being the Beatnik Spaceblade. This is also the only paddle in my database right now with a swing weight below 100, and with a twist weight of 6.21, it's relatively stable for its thinner thickness and ultra high maneuverability, though not as stable as a lot of 16mm Kevlar or wide body paddles. Combining its high pop, maneuverability, and whippy feel, it's one of the single most fun paddles to have in firefights at the net. Even before the production level models of the Dunamis came out, the prototype model had been one of my main paddles of this year, to the point where I was actually playing tournaments with it. The production level paddles didn't disappoint, and each paddle now actually comes with one of the best, if not the best, delivery boxes that I've ever received. Even though this paddle is a personal favorite of mine, one reason this paddle didn't climb higher on this list is that, a lot like the Gearbox PPE or the Yola Mod TA15s, is that this paddle seems somewhat polarizing and people tend to either love it or hate it. It has a more stiff feeling and responsive face, and for people who don't like the feel of particularly stiff paddle faces or feel comfortable applying lead tape to optimize that feel for their preference, the feel of this paddle face may not be ideal. I do think this is a really unique paddle, and I enjoy the ultra high maneuverability it offers, as well as the higher pop and consistency from the paddle face, and I think it would be a great paddle for people who like their paddles to move fast and have an attack-oriented playstyle, but may not be a good paddle for people who like paddles with a more plush feel, or people who are looking for a more control-oriented paddle. Coming in at the number 2 position is the J2K by Honolulu Pickleball Company. This is easily one of the best paddles of the year, and coming in at $135 after this channel's discount code, it's already made an appearance on my video for overall best value pickleball paddles. It's also been named top paddle of the year by Pickleball Pursuit and All Drive No Drop review channels, and comes from one of the most trusted paddle companies that I've ever worked with. The J2K is offered in both the 14mm and 16mm thicknesses, both of which are made from 100% Kevlar paddle faces. The two thicknesses actually play quite differently, with both options being part of the reason why they're so high on my list. The 16mm version plays on the border between all court and control categories and has one of the largest sweet spots of any paddle I've tested, with a twist weight above that Elite 7 mark and a low swing weight of 113, which make it easy to use for players across all skill levels. My favorite of the two, however, is the newly released 14mm J2K. The 14mm J2K is much more poppy and maneuverable than the thicker 16mm J2K, and with the thinner version, I felt like I could counter and attack a lot easier. Compared to the previous paddle on this list, the Ethos Dunamis, I think the 14mm J2K is just a touch more stable, though the Dunamis is certainly more responsive in pop and is more maneuverable. The J2K got the nod here due to not only its lower price, but also the fact that its two options serve a greater variety of the playing field. And not only does the J2K have two thicknesses, but they also offer the J2K Pro, which has a tighter Kevlar weave and increases the pop in each thickness just ever so slightly, though I would say the pop is still a little less than the Dunamis. Before I reveal the number 1 paddle on this list, I did want to name a few specific paddles as honorable mentions. The first honorable mention I'll bring up is the Beatnik Spaceblade. This paddle is definitely the single most poppy Kevlar paddle on the market, and it's not even close. I thought it was ultra fun to play with, and despite its high pop, I didn't have too hard of a time controlling it. The downsides of the Spaceblade so far is that its edgeless design made for a small sweet spot and low stability, and they used a good amount of spray-on grit to apply texture. They actually sent this out to a handful of us reviewers, we gave them feedback on these things, and after their first batch sold out, they're instituting some design changes for the next batch. This is definitely going to be a power paddle to look out for, so keep your eye out for my review when the new design of the Spaceblade hits the streets. Another honorable mention is the Mark I, which is also a great power paddle, and has been my top choice for Kevlar power paddles to this point. I still really love this paddle, and there weren't really any strong reasons that prevented it from being in the top 5, other than I just like these others more. This is the same story for Honolulu's J3K and the Spartus Apollo, both of which are really high performing paddles. The Apollo is actually the top paddle in my database for spin measurements, and it's the cheapest paddle I've tested at $117 after discount codes, and the J3K is a highly stable, very reliable standard shape paddle with a really nice long handle. You couldn't go too wrong with either of these, but again, the paddles that made the top 5 for me really stood out, and I thought they just performed better than these two. And that brings us to my number 1 overall pick for Kevlar paddles, and that is the GRUVN LAZR-16X. To start things off, this paddle comes to $152 after this channel's discount code, and for this particular paddle, I feel this is a very good deal. This paddle has become an all-time favorite of mine, and I've played some of the very best pickleball I ever have while using this paddle. I promise I'll be sure to mention the particular people that I think may not like this paddle as much, but I will say that not only does the LAZR-16X get my top spot for Kevlar paddles, but it also dethrones the 𝐏𝐁𝐿 Control as my previous choice for best all-court Kevlar paddle, and has even surpassed paddles like the Bread and Butter Shogun and the Engage Pursuit Pro as my top pick for elongated paddles of any material, and is probably in my top 2 favorite paddles of all time, alongside the control-oriented Neonic Flow. The LAZR-16X is 16mm thick, elongated with a 5.5-inch handle, and in my subjective opinion, has one of the best looking Kevlar carbon fiber face blends, with the blue and white accents really popping against the red Kevlar weave, though it's also offered in a black and orange design too. In a trend I've seen a lot, particularly in 14mm Kevlar paddles, the introduction of Kevlar into the face of the LAZR-16X not only gives it a unique look, but it actually increases its stability, sweet spot, and forgiveness quite a bit. Its twist weight went from 6.29 in its carbon fiber predecessor, the GRUVN 16X, to 6.92 in the LAZR-16X with the addition of the Kevlar weave. The swing weight of the LAZR-16X has a range of 117 to 122, with most paddles seeming to come in closer to the 117 mark. Mine came in with a swing weight of 122, which give it a comparable weight perception to the Pursuit Pro MX or the Honolulu J7K, and still felt maneuverable enough for me to add any lead tape I wanted, which I placed at the 3 and 9 o'clock positions. Like usual, I did a side-by-side pop and stability test, where I hit the LAZR-16X alongside comparable paddles like the Honolulu J7K, both thicknesses of the 𝐏𝐁𝐈𝐒𝐂𝐒𝐿 Control, the BnB Pro Gen2 and the titanium bread and butter Shogun on light swings, hard serves, and rapid shots with the ball machine. Of all the paddles here, it was clear to me that the LAZR-16X had the largest sweet spot and was the most forgiving on edge shots of any of these paddles I was hitting. It had higher levels of pop than the Shogun, BnB Pro Gen2 and the 𝐏𝐁𝐈𝐒𝐂𝐒, with only the J7K having higher initial levels of pop off the face, with the LAZR-16X being drastically more stable than the J7K and the J7K Pro, and I found I could generate more power on serves and drives with the LAZR-16X than both the J7K and the J7K Pro. On the first day I played with the LAZR-16X, it was clear to me that this paddle could produce elite levels of spin. RPM numbers neared the top tier spin paddles in my database, the most spinny of which are usually wide body shaped, and in the time I've had it, I haven't noticed any drop off in spin rate with the LAZR-16X. I would say in terms of playstyle, the LAZR-16X is in the all-court category, but definitely leans towards power. It gives good power on drives comparable to the Mark I or the Thrive Azul, but not quite up to the Engage Pursuit Pro or Paddletech TKO levels. Some paddles have really huge standout playability features, like the trampoline-like pop of the Yola Mod TA15s, the drive speed of the Gearbox PPEs, or the control of the Mach 2 Forza, and the biggest standout feature of the LAZR-16X for me is consistency. A complaint I hear a lot and experience with some other 16mm paddles like the Pursuit Pro MX 6.0 is that there can be inconsistency in the feel, face compression, and pop depending on where you hit the paddle on the face and how far you stray from the sweet spot. One benefit I've seen with Kevlar paddles so far that is particularly true with the LAZR-16X is that the feel of the face is much more consistent as you go from the center of the paddle face to the periphery, providing more consistent response on volleys, dinks, and drops as you take difficult shots that don't hit exactly in the middle of the sweet spot. This makes it so you can experience more of the benefits of 16mm paddles like higher plow-through drive power, less vibrations from the face, and higher levels of control when compared to 14mm paddles, but you lose some of the cons associated with some other 16mm paddles like inconsistent absorption of the ball on the paddle face. In terms of how the face feels, it does lean more on the stiff feeling side, not so much as the Dunamis does, but if you really prefer plush feeling paddles, that may be a deterrent for you. But like I mentioned before, I've found myself leaning a lot more into this type of feel lately for the added consistency and feel and response during drives, dinks, volleys, and spin application. The response level of the face and consistent nature of it also make it so you don't have to swing the paddle quite as hard to try and engage the face to absorb the ball and impart spin, like you do with more plush feeling paddles or paddles with high levels of ball absorption like the Fat Boy or the Paddletech TKO paddles, and brushing the ball slightly is enough to get the paddle to impart good spin, making attacks and applying spin at the net easier to do and disguise. I personally felt very consistent with control in this paddle despite its good power on drives, and that was one reason why it stood out to me when compared to paddles like the J7K, Paddletech TKOs, or even the Ethos Dunamis. Overall, I think this LAZR-16X makes a really strong argument for this #1 spot. It has the look, the playability, and a very fair price. I think a lot of people would be very happy with this paddle, particularly if you want an elongated paddle that actually has great stability and sweet spot size, excellent spin and a consistent feel, and plays with a power-leaning all-court playstyle. I think the people who may not like this paddle, however, would be people who like the more plush-feeling paddles, those who are looking for something in a very lightweight, like the Dunamis or the 14mm Mage Pro Gen2, or who want something that is more overtly in the power or control categories. And that's my list for the top 5 Kevlar pickleball paddles. Let me know what you think of this list in the comments below, and I hope this review was helpful. If it was, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you here for the next one.